Hi, my name's Ian Copple. I'm based in the Department of Pharmacology and Therapeutics at the University of Liverpool, and I'd like to spend the next 15 minutes talking you through a strategy I've used to adapt my teaching in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how I think the continued use of this approach can help to enhance the student experience in years to come. Okay, so I run a second year undergraduate practical module, Life 234, and in the 2019-2020 academic year we had 105 students and we planned to give them experience of a mixture of 10 lab and computer based practicals, and the table at the bottom just gives you an idea of the schedule for the first 3 weeks. So we've got 5 practicals and 5 groups of students, and they rotate around these 5 practicals in morning and afternoon sessions across the first 3 weeks. And an important thing to highlight is that part of the assessment for this practical module is a lab report, which in this case was based on one of the practicals, a practical based on receptor binding specificity. Okay, so we were able to start the module in week 7, and then straight away then the COVID-19 situation led to the cancellation of face-to-face teaching. So that left us with a dilemma because we'd only managed to get 2 of the 5 groups to take part in the practical on which 50% of the assessment of the module would be based. So quite quickly then we had to adapt to this situation, and we decided that the best approach was actually to film this practical in a step-by-step manner to allow the students who hadn't managed to take it in person to experience what it would have been like to actually do so. And so we went about this by working with the School of Life Sciences technical team. So they prepared the teaching lab in the same way that they would have done for the face-to-face practicals for the students. We then just took over a handheld video recorder and a tripod, and I managed to get 2 of the demonstrators from the module to volunteer to kind of be the actors. I narrated that as well. I edited the film using free software. One of the first things we wanted to do after this was get some idea of whether or not this approach had worked in terms of maintaining the robustness and integrity of the assessment within this module. So we looked at both quantitative and qualitative measures of impact. For quantitative measures, it's important to note that there were 40 students in the 2 groups who'd managed to get into the lab before the cancellation of face-to-face teaching. So they actually had the experience of taking the practical in person, and they also had access to the step-by-step video. And then the remaining 65 students who hadn't managed to take part in this practical, they were only able to access the video. Importantly, the average mark for the lab report was 66% across the whole class, and we also noticed that there was no difference between these 2 groups, indicating that the ability to actually get into the lab in this case hadn't given those students a clear advantage over those that didn't and were only able to watch the video afterwards. There was 1 fail in the group who were able to get into the lab and watch the video, and 2 fails in the groups who only managed to watch the video, which was a larger group. And that's pretty similar to the previous 3 years based on the average mark for the assessment and the numbers of fails. And in all cases, the fails were students who hadn't submitted the assignment. In terms of qualitative impacts, the university's usual EVASYS module evaluation process was cancelled for semester 2 modules in the end of 2020 academic year. So we sent out a bespoke survey to the students on this module, and 90% of the students who responded said that they found the video helpful when they were writing the lab report. And the overall approach in terms of allowing this module to be assessed was commended by the external examiner for our pharmacology BSc degree programme. But perhaps what was most interesting from all this was some of the free text comments that we received from the students as part of this survey. So there's some examples here. I won't go through them all. I think some of the highlights are that the students like the ability to put in context what they can read in the lab manual. It's quite useful for visual learners to be able to have access to this material after they've experienced the practical in the lab. To take this a bit further, I applied for a Learning and Teaching Fellowship in 2020, and I was very grateful to be awarded one, and that was based on the fact that in this survey that we sent to the students, we asked them whether or not they would find it helpful to have access to step-by-step films of basically all the other practicals in the module that they could access before or after taking the practicals in person. It was overwhelmingly yes, the response. A few students said maybe, and none of the students said no. And again, there's some examples of some of the free text comments here that they would really like it to reinforce what they do in the lab. And it's particularly useful for students who have maybe visual impairments. It allows them to take the time, maybe magnify the video, see exactly what's going to take place in the practical and prepare for that. So as part of the fellowship in January 2021, I filmed all of the remaining lab practicals for this module. And the idea was then just to provide those as materials that the students could access in a few days before their practicals in the next running of this module. But then actually, when we look at what happened last academic year, we had a great number of students, 145 students registered. We had to adhere to social distancing in the labs, so that meant the students had to work individually. So in order to accommodate the bigger number of students and the lack of capacity to get these students in big groups into the lab, we decided to cut down the module to 5 lab and computer practicals. They were given access to these materials and the background slides for the different practicals a few days before their group was due to take the practical, and the aim really was just to help them to prepare for what they were going to experience in the lab, understand the concepts and the different steps in the protocol, and then have an opportunity to look back later on once the module had finished on the practicals that they'd taken and potentially use that to help them with the end of module assessments as well. So the EVASYS module evaluation process was running again last year, and we got pretty good scores both in terms of the module being well taught, which got 4.4 out of 5, and the online resources being useful as well, which is 4.3 out of 5. So we were pretty happy with those feedback scores. And the nice thing about having this material recorded now is it's a useful backup for any unexpected events. So for example, if there's a technical issue in one instance of a practical, some equipment fails and the students just can't take forward a critical part of the practical, they're able now to see what should have actually happened. If there are students who have genuine cause to be absent, which was a frequent occurrence. And of course, for the current and any future pandemics, it's particularly useful to have this material now because we may need to go back to a hybrid or fully online form of teaching practical. Okay, I'm not sure I'd change much at this point. It seems to have gone pretty well, but just some things to consider. Just check on the availability of the recording equipment and make sure you're familiar with how to use it if you're going to do it yourself. The video editing software can take a little bit of time just to familiarise yourself with. But I think it's important to highlight there is help available from the Centre for Innovation in Education here in Liverpool, which is great. In terms of timing, you just need to coordinate with your teaching lab technical team on the availability of the lab and their ability to set it up for the practical to be filmed. I found it quite useful to have a step-by-step script for the filming. So here's an example on the right of the slide where we highlighted things that we needed to film being written down in terms of calculations for this particular practical, and then also different steps that we wanted to focus on in terms of the practical protocol being carried out itself as well. And I found it took around about 1 day to film, edit and then narrate. Hopefully you found that of interest. I know many colleagues are already incorporating these kind of approaches. It has the potential to enhance the student learning experience. Hopefully this gives you some inspiration and ideas to think about.